Emma Torres, once a frontline medic, now works unseen behind a radio at Echo Base. When a brutal storm traps Captain Blake and his squad in enemy fire, Command deems it a kill zone, no rescue authorized. But Emma, haunted by past helplessness and driven by a medic's oath, refuses to stand down. With a stolen Humvee, she drives into the chaos alone, rescuing half the squad under heavy fire. Yet Blake and others remain. Defying orders once more, Emma returns into the storm. What she finds and risks will test the line between duty and defiance in ways no one at Echo Base expects. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories of unsung heroes like Emma Torres, those who step into the storm when others step back. Stand with courage, subscribe now, and be part of the mission. Nod of acknowledgement, and then disappeared into the brightness of the day, stepping into a vehicle that would take him and his team toward danger. Emma watched until the last Humvee rolled out of view, dust curling behind the tires like smoke from a fuse. She returned to her console, back to the routine, her fingers finding their rhythm once more over familiar keys. The radio was quiet for a while. Too quiet. Hours passed. Heat shimmered off the desert floor, and the low hum of the generators became a lullaby. But then the silence shattered. A burst of static cracked through the headset, followed by a voice sharp with panic. Gunfire in the background. Coordinates. Urgency. Emma sat bolt upright. A patrol ambushed, pinned down, multiple wounded, requesting immediate extraction. She relayed the request up the chain, fingers flying, adrenaline overtaking fatigue. But then the answer came, not from a medic, not from a rescue team, but from command. That area is now a kill zone. No rescue authorized. The words chilled the air, final and brutal, a death sentence dressed as protocol. Emma's jaw tightened. She repeated the message into the mic, voice flat, betraying none of what she felt. No response came, just the fading screams and static. 7 lives hanging in the balance, written off with cold detachment. She could have stopped there, followed orders, turned off her headset and looked away like the others. But Emma Torres didn't move. She didn't look away. She stared out at the storm crawling across the desert, dark clouds looming like the shadow of death itself. Somewhere out there, Captain Blake and his team were still alive, maybe bleeding, maybe running out of time. She could almost hear the chaos, smell the coppery tang of blood in the heat. Her breath quickened. Every instinct in her screamed, "Go." She stood, no longer the quiet voice behind the console, but the combat medic she had trained to be. Pain surged through her leg as she moved, the old injury flaring up, but she didn't falter. In the motor pool, dust swirled around rows of parked vehicles. But Emma found the keys she needed, climbed into a Humvee, hands shaking but steady on the wheel. She gritted her teeth, pushed past the checkpoint. The guard shouted. She didn't answer. Heart thundering, bullets splitting air like lightning, the storm swallowing everything in its path. She drove straight into it, into the kill zone, alone, no backup, no authorization. Just her, a battered Humvee, and the will to defy the impossible. Because Emma Torres had made a promise long before the uniform, before Echo Base, before radios and orders and medals that never came. She had made it to a dying girl on a Texas road. Never again. And now, with the storm closing in and her radio silent, Emma Torres was going to keep that promise, even if it cost her everything. He gave a weary smile and lifted his hand in a brief salute. "Always, Sergeant May," he said, and then he was gone, his boots crunching over gravel as he jogged to rejoin his team. Emma watched him go, her gaze following the convoy as it rumbled out through the gates, engines growling, dust clouds rising behind them like ghosts. 7 men in that unit, 7 voices she knew she would be tracking over the radio, just like she had done for every patrol that crossed beyond the safety of the wire. One of them was Blake. She turned back to her station, but a chill of unease had already begun crawling through her. Her screen blinked with new weather data. The winds had shifted. Atmospheric pressure was rising sharply. A storm was forming, faster, more violent than any of the earlier forecasts had hinted. It was accelerating, barreling straight towards Sector 4. That was where Blake's team was headed. Emma pressed a finger to her headset, voice clipped and professional despite the tension in her chest. Echo base to Wolfpack 1. Be advised. Weather system forming in your sector. Visibility may degrade quicker than expected. Blake's voice crackled through moments later, calm but alert. Copy, Echo. Appreciate the heads up. But the warning felt hollow in her throat. It wasn't just a storm. Not anymore. The data on her screen told a darker story, one of swirling winds, zero visibility, rising static that would jam radio frequencies. A perfect curtain for an ambush. An invisible trap. Emma flagged the information and sent it directly to the operations officer on shift. His response came without looking up. We can't call back every patrol just because the weather acts up, Rodriguez. They'll adjust. And just like that, it was brushed aside. So she sat, watching the storm build in real time, powerless to stop any of it. Minutes turned into hours. The air grew heavy, the heat oppressive. Communications with Wolfpack 1 became patchy as the storm's interference thickened. Static bled into every transmission. Then the moment came. Sharp, urgent, unmistakable. Echo base, this is Wolfpack 1. Mayday, Mayday. We're under fire. IED at village entrance. We're pinned down, multiple wounded, immediate extraction needed. Emma froze, but only for the span of a heartbeat. Then her fingers moved in a blur over the console. She locked onto their coordinates, pushed the distress to command channels, and lit up every emergency protocol. The command center exploded into motion. Officers swarmed the room. Colonel Matthews appeared behind her, towering, his eyes locked on the digital battlefield blooming across her monitor. Emma kept the line open, her voice steady, though her heart thundered in her chest. Wolfpack 1 Echo base. Mayday received. Hold your position. We're working on extraction options. She could hear the edge in Blake's reply. The strain, the desperation buried under professionalism. Echo, we've got 3 critical. Lambert's hit, chest wound. Diaz is bleeding out. Johnson's leg, it's gone. We're not going to hold much longer. Emma's stomach turned cold. She pushed the updates up the chain, watched options get evaluated and dismissed, one by one. Finally, Matthews spoke, each word like iron. That area's a kill zone now. No rescue authorized. Too hot, too risky. We wait for the storm to pass. Emma hesitated. Her hand hovered above the mic. She didn't want to speak. Didn't want to be the voice that delivered the sentence. Send the order, Matthews snapped. Her throat was dry as sand as she pressed the transmit button. Wolfpack 1 Echo base. Command advises no extraction at this time. Area designated a kill zone. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Say again, Echo base. Blake's voice cracked through the static, sharp with disbelief. No extraction authorized. Her voice faltered. I'm sorry, sir. She heard it, Blake trying to steady his men, to hold them together as the betrayal sank in. Emma leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the blinking lights of her console. Outside, the storm raged louder, howling against the base walls like it wanted in. Through the window, she saw a group of mechanics finishing up on a Humvee. The engine idled, forgotten for the moment. Her eyes shifted to the locked med cabinet, then to the sidearm holstered at her hip. Standard issue, rarely needed inside the wire, but the voice in her head kept replaying over and over. 3 critical. They won't make it without extraction. Emma Torres had enlisted to act when others stood still, to protect lives when others hesitated. Now, with a storm tightening its grip and 7 men left to die, she realized there was no one else coming. If anything was going to change, it had to be her. She stood slowly, the hum of radio chatter fading behind her as she walked toward the threshold between duty and defiance. For one suspended breath, she stood frozen. Her pulse thudded louder than the storm. The words she'd just spoken, no rescue authorized, circled in her head like a curse. In all her years of service, she'd never imagined she'd be the one to tell brave men they weren't worth the risk. Around her, the command center moved on. Officers spoke in low tones, pointing at maps, screens, radios, anywhere but at her. She had played her role, followed orders, said the words. Now officially, she was done. All she had left to do was wait, for the storm to pass and for the casualty report to arrive. But she couldn't sit there, couldn't breathe that recycled air a second longer. Her boots met the gravel as she stepped outside, heading nowhere, just needing to move. The storm lashed her face, stinging her skin with grit and filling her mouth with the taste of failure. 3 critical, the voice repeated in her head. They won't survive without extraction. Blake's voice still echoed in her mind, low, urgent, and heavy with warning. Won't make it without extraction. The words haunted her as she reached the long line of Humvees parked in the lot. Her gaze locked onto the one nearest to the gate. The engine still radiated warmth, the keys dangling from the ignition like an invitation or a challenge. A sudden gust of wind clanged against the chain-link fence beyond, rattling it like a final warning. Emma stood there, rooted, staring at the vehicle as if it were a doorway she had never noticed before. Her pulse quickened. Could she do it? Should she? The storm outside was relentless, reducing visibility to near zero. That worked both ways. The enemy couldn't see her, but neither could she see them. Command had already marked that area a kill zone. There would be no rescue mission, no backup, no birds in the sky. If she went out there, she wouldn't just be disobeying orders. She would be going against command itself. Her hand drifted instinctively to her pocket, brushing against the cold edges of the small silver cross her mother had tucked into her palm before deployment. Her mother's voice rose softly in memory, not loud, not pleading, just firm, full of conviction. Do what you know is right. Emma's jaw clenched, her gaze sharpened. She did know what was right. Without hesitation, she pivoted on her heel and made her way back to the communications center, each step more certain than the last. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity, with resolve. A plan was already stitching itself together in her mind. She needed supplies, bandages, clotting agents, morphine, water. A sidearm, not to strike, but to protect if she had to. Defense only. Inside the dimly lit comm center, her movements were precise, composed. No one paid her any special attention. She was just the comm sergeant, doing her duty, gathering a standard med kit, nothing more. No one questioned her. Why would they? Once everything was in her bag, she returned to her desk and tapped the mic one last time. Her voice dropped so low it barely carried. Wolfpack 1, hold position. Help is coming. Silence. Then static. Then Blake's voice, thin, frayed around the edges with disbelief and hope. Echo base. Did I hear that right? She didn't reply. She couldn't. Not on an open frequency. But she knew he understood. She slipped from the building and crossed the base as the wind howled louder, merciless and wild. The motor pool was deserted. The mechanics had taken cover from the sandstorm. Perfect. She climbed into the Humvee, settled into the seat, took a breath, and started the engine. Its roar was more than mechanical. It felt like defiance given form. She knew how to kill the tracker. Of course she did. Communication specialists like her were trained to monitor every unit on the move. A few quick taps under the dashboard, fingers flying with confidence, and just like that, the Humvee vanished from the base's surveillance grid. No alerts, no red flags. As far as the system was concerned, that vehicle didn't exist anymore. Emma drove toward the gates. No one stopped her. The storm had drawn attention elsewhere. Guards squinted through the dust, barely glancing at another camouflage vehicle slipping into the chaos. Vehicles came and went often enough. Nothing seemed out of place. She kept her eyes straight ahead, hands firm on the wheel, until the fence and the lights of the base disappeared into the swirling storm behind her, swallowed by wind and memory. The world outside turned ghostly and hostile. Sand slashed sideways across the windshield. The landscape morphed into a blur of dunes and shattered silhouettes. The storm screamed around her like a living, raging thing, trying to smother her resolve, to break her focus. But she drove on, steady and sure. Her sense of direction guided more by instinct and recalled maps than anything she could actually see. Every training session, every terrain briefing, every last coordinate Blake's squad had radioed in. It was all there, in her head. She held on to one truth, fierce and unyielding. She would not let them die. Each mile she conquered was a battle, against the storm, against the odds, against the voice of doubt whispering in the corners of her mind, telling her this was insane. But louder than that was the voice she chose to listen to, the voice that had sworn an oath, the voice that said, "Never leave a comrade behind." Then, like a ghost surfacing through fog, the outline of a shattered village appeared. Smoke twisted upward, black ribbons snaking into the already dark sky, vanishing into the sand-choked air. Gunfire crackled in the distance, sharp, lethal bursts buried beneath the howling wind. Emma swung the Humvee around the remains of a crumbling wall, cut the engine, and sat for a heartbeat. One breath, then another. This was the edge, the moment that would change everything. She grabbed her medkit, checked her sidearm, and stepped out into the gale. The sand hit her like a swarm of hornets, stinging every exposed inch of her skin. She hunched low, moving behind the cover of the wall, wind clawing at her hair and uniform. The storm was deafening, but not enough to drown out the occasional sound of battle. Distant shouts, the eerie echo of gunfire, too close and too desperate to ignore. Her thoughts narrowed to a single goal: find them, save them. She squinted into the swirling chaos, scanning the wreckage of the village. Collapsed rooftops, splintered structures, jagged silhouettes that might be insurgents or shadows. Somewhere inside that wreckage, Captain Blake's squad was holding on, waiting, hoping. She keyed her radio, her voice low and unwavering. "Wolfpack 1, this is Echo. I'm just outside your position. What's your location?" For a moment, nothing, only static, the storm, her own ragged breathing. Then, "Echo, Torres, is that really you?" Blake's voice cracked through the storm, raw, astonished. "We're in the second building east of the square. 2 walls still standing. Watch the west, sniper position." "Copy," she replied. She moved without hesitation, crouched low, body pressed to crumbling stone. Every step mattered. The storm gave her cover, but it gave it to the enemy too. Twice she stopped dead as figures loomed out of the haze. Insurgents, rifles in hand, just yards away. Dust blurred their outlines. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Once she pressed so tight to the remains of a wall that the crumbling cement scraped her skin. Still she moved forward, always forward. She was bleeding from the arm, cut deep, but she didn't stop, couldn't. The pain was irrelevant now. Through the haze of sand and chaos, the structure finally came into view. It wasn't much of a building anymore, more of a ghost of what it had once been. Half the roof had caved in, jagged metal and stone framing blown-out windows like empty sockets staring into the storm. But inside, movement, life. Emma Torres saw them first. Blake's squad. 7 worn-down figures, hollow-eyed and shell-shocked. They stared at her like she was an illusion summoned from the storm, a phantom too good to be real. "Emma?" Blake's voice cracked, hoarse and stunned. "Borrowed some transportation," she said briskly, already kneeling beside Diaz. He was barely clinging to consciousness, blood soaking through the front of his fatigues. His skin was pale, waxy. She worked fast, tourniquet, clotting agent, pressure applied with surgical precision. Her hands were quick, efficient. This wasn't emotion. This was survival. Blake watched her, his jaw tight, pain etched in every line of his face. A rough field bandage wrapped around his thigh, where a bullet had chewed through muscle. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she answered, firm. Her tone allowed no argument, no room for second-guessing. Nearby, Lambert lay sprawled against the shattered wall, struggling to breathe. His lips were edged with blue, chest heaving unevenly. A deep wound cut across his ribs. Emma reinforced his dressing, gave him a measured dose of morphine, then moved on. No hesitation. Johnson was next, his leg gone below the knee, the ragged stump wrapped in soaked gauze. The tourniquet had slipped. She tightened it, felt for a pulse. Still a live button, but just barely. "We can't hold this position," Blake said, eyes flicking toward the outside. Gunfire was getting closer, louder. The storm wasn't hiding them anymore. The enemy was moving in. "Then we don't," Emma replied. 2 people on each stretcher. I'll cover the retreat. The storm's thick enough to give us a chance." Blake didn't waste time arguing. Just 1 second of hesitation. Then, "You heard her. Move!" Her presence gave them strength. Even through the pain and fear, her certainty became theirs. They rallied. Diaz and Lambert were loaded onto makeshift stretchers cobbled from tarps and splintered beams. Johnson, conscious but barely holding on, clenched his jaw as two soldiers lifted him. Emma led the way, weapon raised, scanning every shifting shadow. The storm was a cloak, but a thin one. It concealed as much as it threatened. Shapes moved on the edge of her vision, blurs of motion and menace. One got too close. She fired. A short, controlled burst. The figure dropped. No time to check. They reached the Humvee. Every stem had been a war. Muscles burning, lungs choked with sand and grit. She helped to load the injured, carefully, and then climbed into the driver's seat. "Torres!" Blake called, his voice rough. "We might not be here when you get back." "You will," she said. She meant it with every beat of her heart. The engine roared to life. Bullets pinged against the armor as she gunned the vehicle forward, driving hard into the storm. Behind them, the village vanished into the chaos. The shouts of the enemy faded, swallowed by wind and distance. Inside the Humvee, every breath was agony. The wounded moaned, whispered words of comfort to one another. Emma's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Hold on," she murmured, to them, to herself. Ahead, through the swirling dust, the lights of Echo Base shimmered like stars breaking through a suffocating night. She grabbed the radio mic. "Echo Base, this is Sergeant Torres, inbound with wounded, 3 critical, 2 walking wounded. Request immediate med response at Southgate." Static, then confusion. "Torres? Say again, how?" "2 minutes out," she cut in. "Be ready." They crossed the perimeter and were immediately swarmed by medics. Emma jumped out before the Humvee had fully stopped, barking out injury reports, vitals, priority orders. Her words were clipped, urgent. She didn't pause to catch her breath. Within seconds, she was back at the supply station, grabbing bandages, plasma bags, a fresh med kit. She refueled, shoved extra ammo into side pouches. A young private handed her more rounds, eyes wide, speechless. She didn't need thanks. She needed speed. Colonel Matthews appeared furious. "Sergeant Torres, you are out of line. You've disobeyed orders, commandeered military." "Sir," the voice that cut through his fury didn't belong to her. General Harrison stepped forward, calm despite the storm flaring his coat. He locked eyes with Emma, quiet but commanding. "Let her go." Matthews blinked. "Sir, you heard me, Colonel. Every second we argue, those men's chances shrink." That was all Emma needed. No more hesitation. She threw herself back into the driver's seat and floored the gas. The Humvee lurched forward, swallowed instantly by the storm's mouth. The second trip was worse. The storm had grown angrier, more violent, as if it knew she was defying it. The wind screamed around her, sand finding every weakness in the Humvee's armor. Even with goggles, her eyes stung. Her throat burned. Her arms trembled from fatigue. But she pushed on. She drove by instinct now. Landmarks vanished, erased by dust and rage. Twice she had to turn back, circling until something in her gut told her she was on the right track. The radio crackled uselessly. Static still hissed faintly through the comms, mostly dead air, with the occasional burst of garbled voices that fizzled before they formed words. Emma kept her thoughts razor sharp. "Get to them. Bring them back." Distant gunfire crackled like dry branches snapping underfoot, carried erratically by the raging storm, as though the wind itself was scattering the sound into fragments. She cut the engine well before reaching the edge of the village. The enemy would be listening, and she couldn't risk giving them an audible trail. From here on, it would be all on foot. Grabbing her medkit and sidearm, she stepped out into the chaos. The storm pressed in from every direction, but she moved with purpose toward the last known location of Blake's team. The village emerged from the sand like a broken memory, shattered walls rising from the ground, roofs torn halfway apart, and hollow windows that gaped like the vacant eyes of the dead. She kept low, slipping through shadows, the debris and thick dust offering fragmented cover. Figures shifted through the storm's blur, enemy patrols, ghost-like silhouettes distorted by swirling sand. Twice she had to go still, heart pounding as armed fighters passed just feet from where she crouched, their shapes more imagined than seen. Once she almost stepped on a rifle, nearly invisible, buried up to its trigger in sand. Then through the haze, she caught sight of Torres, one of Blake's men, rifle raised and ready until his eyes registered her presence. "Torres?" she called, just loud enough to be heard. His shoulders dropped in relief. "Emma, you came back." "I told you I would," she answered, voice firm, unshaken. Torres led her to where the rest of the team was holed up, a building that looked like it was losing a slow battle with time and war, its walls fractured and sagging under the weight of survival. Inside, Blake was slumped against one of them, his face pale, his uniform soaked dark at the thigh with blood that refused to stop flowing. Jenkins was nearby, crouched low with his weapon aimed at the door, eyes alert. Emma dropped to her knees beside Blake without hesitation. She pulled out a fresh bandage, already working before the others even realized she'd arrived. Her hands moved with efficiency, trained and focused. She tightened a wrap to slow the bleeding and pressed an injector to his skin. "You're lucky," she muttered, eyes on the wound. "That bullet missed your femoral artery by millimeters." "Doesn't feel very lucky," Blake rasped through clenched teeth. "It's about to." Outside, gunfire grew louder, closer. The enemy was closing in fast, tightening their grip. Time was gone. "We can't stay here," Emma said quickly. "The Humvee's south, 300 yards. If we move now and fast, we'll make it." Blake clenched his jaw and pushed himself upright, pain etched into every line of his face. "If the alternative's staying to die, then I'm moving." Emma gave a nod. "Torres, Jenkins, cover us. Move on my mark." They burst out into the storm, a chaotic blur of movement and desperation. Bullets screamed past, slicing the air. Emma didn't look back, just ran, dragging Blake with her. The Humvee was a distant dream at first, a vague shape distorted by dust and distance. Then it grew closer, closer until it was finally within reach. They piled in. Emma slid into the driver's seat, hands slick with sweat and dirt. Torres was already firing from the passenger side, keeping enemy heads down. The engine roared to life under her grip, and she pushed the vehicle harder than it was ever meant to go. The storm chased them, and bullets kept coming, pinging off the Humvee's armor, tracers cutting glowing lines through the dark like angry ghosts. But ahead, through the chaos, lights began to emerge, dim at first, then brighter. The base. "Hold on," she whispered, though no one could hear her. It was as much a command to herself as it was to the others. "We're almost home." The storm had begun to thin by the time Emma and Torres blasted through the base's southern gate. The Humvee was battered, coated in grime, its windshield shattered into a spiderweb of fractures. The headlights cut through dust as medics raced toward the vehicle even before it fully stopped. They yanked open the rear doors and began pulling Blake and Jenkins out with practiced hands. Emma stumbled from the driver's seat, her legs like jelly, her entire body trembling under the weight of exhaustion and adrenaline. A medic reached for her, but she brushed him off, forcing her body to remain upright. Around her, chaos resumed. Shouts of orders, boots slamming against hard ground, stretchers disappearing into tents. But for Emma, the world narrowed to the faint pulse in her ears and the look Blake gave her, a small, grateful nod, as he was carried away. Then the crowd split. Colonel Matthews appeared, walking straight toward her, his face a storm of fury barely contained. His voice, when it came, was controlled but cold, cutting like a scalpel. "Sergeant Torres, you disobeyed direct orders. You abandoned your post. You stole military property and risked not just your life, but the lives of everyone on this base." Emma stood tall, even as her limbs begged her to collapse. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, caked with dust. Her voice stayed even. "Yes, sir." Matthews glared, eyes blazing. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Before she could answer, a voice rose, clear, firm, impossible to ignore. "That's enough, Colonel. Look at her." General Cole Harrison stepped forward, his uniform marked by the same storm as everyone else's, but his presence undeniable. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, attention shifting entirely to him. He walked up to Emma slowly, stopping just before her. For a moment he said nothing, just studied her, past the grime, past the fatigue, to something deeper. Then silently he raised his hand in a salute. "Sergeant Torres," his voice rang out, every word deliberate, "you have exemplified the highest traditions of this unit, of the Army, of the values we say we stand for. You risked everything because we leave no one behind. And today you made sure we didn't. Around them, the silence deepened as one by one the soldiers standing nearby raised their hands and saluted. No fanfare, no words, just respect, spoken with action. Even Colonel Matthews, jaw tight with resentment, lifted his hand at last, his salute slower, but undeniable. Emma felt her throat tighten. The weight of everything, the fear, the fatigue, the fury, rose inside her, but she refused to let it break the surface. She returned the salute, sharp and steady, then let her hand fall, and with it, her strength. Her shoulders slumped, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion it had held at bay for far too long. In the days that followed, Blake began to heal. Medics said he would have bled out if Emma hadn't acted so quickly. Every second had mattered. Every decision, every sprint through gunfire, every drop of sweat, it had made the difference. She had placed them with a precision few could match and retrieved them with a speed that left people speechless. After that, something shifted in the air around Echo Base. The energy on base changed, almost imperceptibly at first, but then undeniably. Where Emma Torres had once walked unnoticed through the halls, now there were NOS, quiet acknowledgments, a respect that didn't need to be spoken out loud. In the mess hall, in the motor pool, even in the comm center, everywhere she went, people looked at her differently. New recruits lowered their voices when speaking about her, trading stories like folklore passed between generations. Veterans offered a nod, a hand on the shoulder, no applause, no speeches, just simple gestures that said, "We see you now." And Emma? She returned to her post without fanfare. Back to the radios, the worn maps, the quiet operations that held the base together in ways few ever realized. But while the tasks remained the same, something inside had changed. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She wasn't overlooked. She'd become part of the pulse of the place, recognized, acknowledged, and perhaps most profoundly understood. One evening, Blake found her leaning against the comms building, arms folded, watching the horizon as the sun painted the sky in molten gold. His limp was more pronounced than before, but his smile had lost none of its steadiness. "You turned into Echo Base's hero," he told her, his voice soft. Emma shook her head, eyes still on the sky. "I just did what needed to be done." Blake chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "Funny thing," he said, "that's exactly why you are one." Later that night, long after the base had gone quiet, Emma sat alone in front of the memorial wall. Her eyes scanned the plaques, fingers tracing names she'd memorized during sleepless nights. No new plaques had been added. 7 names that could have been etched in stone were still out there, still breathing, still alive. And that meant something. Something bigger than protocol, bigger than rank. That night, she understood something she hadn't been able to put into words before. Courage wasn't about always obeying or always rebelling. It wasn't about medals or missions. It was about listening. Listening to that voice deep inside, the one that speaks not in commands, but in truths. The one that says, "Do the right thing even when it costs you everything." That kind of duty, she realized, was the kind no storm could ever wash away. As the dust settled across Echo Base, the tale of that day didn't just become another war story. It became something more. It wasn't about defiance or even bravery, not entirely. It was about something quieter, deeper, a strength that lives beneath the surface and only shows itself when the world demands more than anyone thinks you can give. Emma Torres never set out to be a hero. She wasn't chasing medals, fame, or gratitude. When everything was on the line, she moved because she understood the truth of duty. Not the kind found in manuals or shouted from command towers, but the kind bound to people, to lives that hang in the balance. In that storm, when the rules fell silent and the air was thick with fear, she remembered what it truly means to serve. It means not abandoning those who depend on you, no matter the odds. It's easy from a distance to judge, to look back and dissect decisions with clarity hindsight provides, to say what should have happened, what choices would have made more sense. But courage isn't clean. It isn't neat or convenient. It's messy. It's terrifying. And more often than not, it means stepping forward when no one else will, even when you're scared, even when you know what it might cost. What Emma did that day saved lives, but it also lit a flame, a reminder of what the uniform is supposed to stand for. The salutes she received afterward weren't just for the mission completed. They were for the spirit she reignited, a spirit that promised we leave no one behind, not even when the odds are impossible. And for those who watched her story unfold, it left behind a far more personal question. What would you have done? When orders say no, but your heart screams yes, where do you draw the line? In our world today, a world wrapped in rules, paperwork, and endless debates, we still face moments that test our character. Not always on a battlefield, but in offices, homes, schools, streets, moments when doing what's right asks more of us than what's easy or accepted. So what does courage mean to you? Is it unwavering loyalty to command, or is it a fierce commitment to the people counting on you? Have you ever stood where Emma stood, faced a choice where there was no clear answer, only what you knew deep down had to be done? We want to hear your story. If this one touched your heart, if it made you pause and reflect, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling the stories of those quiet heroes, those who prove that courage isn't rare. It's just often unseen until the moment demands it. Thank you for being here. Until next time.